Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. Today's video, we're going to talk through all the books I read in the month of February. I will say February was a very weird reading month for me. Technically, I did read a good amount. I just felt like I was picking up books and putting them down and not in the mood for things. And there is a book to blame for that, so we will get to it. Just could not get sucked into books after this book I read in the month. And so finally, towards like the end of the month, I ended up picking up steam with a lot of books. But yeah, there was quite a few books that you won't even see on this list that I picked up, got maybe 20 to 30% in and put down because it just wasn't the vibe for the month. I just could not get into things. I don't know what it was. So I have 9 books to talk to you about, and I'm just going to go in no particular order. I do have a reading vlog up where you can see some of the books I read, so I will link any reading vlogs up in the cards or down below, so you can check those out if you want to know more thoughts on them while I'm reading them. So let's start with the book that ruined my life in the best way. So I read The Will of the Many by James Islington, and if you've seen my reading vlog, you know that I loved this book with my whole heart, which was simultaneously the best thing and the worst thing for me. So I loved this book so much that I felt like picking up any other fantasy or even any other book in general, it just didn't have the magic that was in this book. It's not even that this book is necessarily the greatest thing written, or that if I had read it at a different time, maybe I wouldn't have liked it as much. It is a great book, and I think that it has a lot of merit, and like a lot of people love it, and I think for good reason. But I just mean that it's not like it was doing anything especially crazy that it should have hit me this hard, so much so that like no book could compare for the month. I even started picking up Emily Wilde, the 3rd book, and I was like, I need to put this down because I'm worried that like whatever was in this is not going to make that book be as good. I know that I would be loving that book in a different time, so I like soft put it down. I only got in like 10%, but I just wasn't like the magic of it, and so that's how hard this book hit me. So this is a fantasy story where we're following Biz, who is an orphan who gets adopted by this man who wants to take down the hierarchy, which is the government in this world. And he needs Viz to go into this school that trains the elite children to grow up and get different ranks within the community. And it's a competition of sorts. You have to do like some kind of maze thing, and there's the magic system works off of like your will, so you seed will to other people, and that's how the magic goes around. And I've heard it described kind of like a pyramid scheme, which feels very right for how it's described in here. And Viz agrees and also has his own agenda of why he wants to go and help take down this hierarchy and spy on people from the inside. We see him as he just journeys, he makes friends, he figures out more that's going on that he's not been told, and the plot just gets bigger and bigger. And I have heard it described like Hunger Games, and at first I didn't see it, but the last half really takes place during like a tournament of sorts, and that does feel very Hunger Games to me. So if you do like the Hunger Games for that reason, the good like last half of the book I feel like really deals with that. I love the way that James Islington deals with tropes we've seen before, like the Chosen One and things like that. It's nothing really that new, like I've said, but he just does it really well in a way that just like sucked me in so much. I don't know what he put in this book to make me love it so much, but it's unlocked something in me, and the rest of the month I've just been searching for that feeling again of a 5-star book, and I've gotten close, but just not the same. So this is why the rest of the month I was in the weirdest reading mood ever. So then we'll talk about 2 books I read for the I Love Black Horror Readathon. As you may know, in the US it's Black History Month, so I read these for that, and I talked about it in the reading vlog that I will link up here. And that is The Deep and The Changeling by Victor LaValle. So we'll start with The Deep. The Deep is by Rivers Solomon. This is my first Rivers Solomon. They recently came out with a book called Model Home, which I've heard good things about, and I do think I want to give that one a go. This one, however, is not really horror. I thought it was horror when I went in, but I was wrong. It's more of a mythology type story. So we're basically following characters who are mermaids, essentially, that have developed because of when Black women were thrown overboard during the transatlantic slave trade. They were pregnant women, and then they give birth, and that is what the mermaid characters are. And so we explore a lot of like collective trauma and history, and how much grief and just trauma there is from this particular moment in US history, but also just in general, there's a lot of parallels to collective grief and who gets to hold those histories and forgetting about the history because it's so painful, but how that actually doesn't serve us. And I think it's very poignant. It talks a lot about things that I think are very relevant right now in the US. And so it is doing it through this fantasy lens. And I ended up giving it like 3.5 stars because it's not a very linear plot. It's just about this mermaid Yetu who is the keeper of the stories. So basically once a year she kind of imparts all the memories that she's keeping inside her to her people, and the rest of the year she is the one keeping those memories. And so it's a lot of hardship on her, and we're just following her as she like goes through a range of emotions, and she meets other people. She meets land dwellers. I don't know if that's what they call them, but that's what it's called in Coral Island, so that's where my head went. But she does meet some people on land, and it's really just a meandering story that just really wanted to explore this idea of collective trauma, and I think it did that really well. But I think from an actual reading experience for the story, it just didn't work for me quite as much. Then I have The Changeling by Victor LaValle, and if there's anything Victor LaValle does well, it is that he can make a story where you think it's one thing at the beginning and then it goes completely off the rails wild at the end. I've read Lone Women by him and then this one, and Lone Women is still my favorite, but this one was also very good. And yeah, it starts out where you think it's a literary story about a young couple and postpartum depression and child loss, and then it goes into just a wild direction that I can't even begin to really explain where it goes, but it gets weird. It gets a little like, I don't know, if you read Lone Women, it's kind of like similar vibes to that. It gets a lot of different elements where it's horror, it's kind of fantasy, it's kind of mythology, it's kind of literary. So I really enjoyed it. I think that if you like a literary horror, this could really work for you. I didn't know how I felt about it the first half. I thought I would give it maybe like a 2.5, a 3. I just wasn't jiving with it, and then the last half got really weird and I really liked it, and I could see all the stuff that was building in the front half, how it all connected to make the story more powerful. But I will say a lot of these books have trigger warnings, and I would always suggest you check out trigger warnings if you have any sensitivities. I always look them up before I go into books. This one specifically deals with child loss, but also postpartum depression. It says postpartum depression, but I also think it's a bit of like postpartum psychosis, and you don't really know if what is happening is real or not, and there's violence, and it gets very hard to read for a good portion of the beginning. So just know that going into it, it does deal with that a lot. And I feel like the title kind of gives that away because the changeling traditionally are children who have been taken by the Fae, and they are swapped for a changeling, and the parents are left with a baby that's not their own. So that was The Changeling. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Glory Be by Danielle Arsenault, and this is the start of a new cozy mystery series called the Glory Broussard mystery series. This is following a older woman. I believe she's in her like 50s, early 60s, and her daughter is coming home to help her as her best friend has passed away, and her best friend was a nun, and they believe that she unalived herself, and our main character, Glory, is going to figure out what actually happened to her friend, and her daughter go on an adventure to figure out what happened to her friend. But also, this book is really less about the mystery and more about Delphine and Glory. Delphine is Glory's daughter, and the different things that they have going on in their lives. They're both dealing with personal matters that I really feel like takes a front seat to the mystery. The mystery is a very like backseat part of the story. I feel like there isn't a lot of like trying to solve the mystery. There is some, but not as much as you would expect. And I didn't really love the way the mystery wrapped up. It was kind of lackluster for me. And then also, the characters are very flawed characters, and I think that, me personally, there is a trope in here for one of the characters that I really don't like to read, and it was done in a way that, like, I feel like our character is just, like, not caring and repeating the same mistakes, and so for me personally, I just didn't really enjoy it. Putting that aside, I feel like the overall rating I have for it is a 3-star, because overall, it just had potential to be a really great, like, fun mystery series. And to me, it just ended up being more of a slice of life story with a touch of mystery. And I wanted it to balance the two in a better way. So I think I'm going to go with 3 stars on this. Next, I read another 4-star book, and that's The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. This is a 1001 Nights retelling of sorts. We're following characters that are descendants of the Sultan who is part of the tale of the 1001 Nights. And then it also has like an Aladdin vibe, which is also part of the story. So in this story, we're following a merchant who deals in like illegal jinn objects that have magic, and a prince who is kind of naive. He is stuck in the castle and he just really wants to see the world and have an adventure, and he loves stories. We follow as the Sultan tasks the merchant with finding this jinn lamp that will have a jinn in it that can grant you wishes and will be at your command. And so she has to go and find this object, and we follow while her and the prince go on this journey. And there's a lot of things that are happening under the surface. We're also following the perspective of another character who is a guard that is part of the other prince's 40 thieves. So there's 2 princes. The older prince has 40 thieves that he tasks with doing different things, and she goes with them to ensure that they get this task done. As soon as they start the adventure, it's very thing after thing. So if you are someone who doesn't like a ton of action in your books, I don't know if it'll work for you, but it really worked for me. I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the retelling side of things, but I also really liked seeing our different characters. I feel like the roles were kind of reversed. We see a prince who's very soft, and he is very emotional, but he is also just like so full of heart and tries so hard, and he's just learning because he's just very naive and sheltered. And I don't think you always get that in stories. It felt very different for what a lot of roles men have in our fantasy stories, but just stories in general. And so I really appreciated seeing a very soft and vulnerable prince character who grows along the way. And then I also really appreciated seeing our main character, Luli, her journey. And she has a guard that has kind of been with her since she was little, and I loved their relationship so much. I loved the bond they had. It was truly like a family bond, and the ride I went on with them, and specifically Katir, his storyline. I love him so much, and I need good things for him. So I read this. I'm very excited. It's part of a series. The Ash King comes out, I believe, April 14th. I think it's called The Ash King. I'll put it up here. And I can't wait because I will be continuing on. This was such a fun fantasy series, and I can see it being just like a fun ride. Kind of reminded me of Adventures of Mina al-Sarafi, but more serious. So if you like that, maybe you could give this a try. It was really good. I would recommend. Next, I read a book that everyone's been raving about, and that is James by Percival Everett. This is my second Percival Everett. I recently read Trees, and this is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, but from James's perspective, who is a runaway enslaved person, and we are following him and his journey as he is having to navigate this world and try to figure out how he can get his family back and save them, while also navigating the fact that if you've never read the original, people think he's kidnapped Huckleberry Finn and they're looking for him, so they're constantly on the run. And I really liked the way that this story paralleled Huckleberry Finn, because in Huckleberry Finn, the story is a lot of adventure of a young boy growing up, and all he cares about is adventure, and then he gets this big grand adventure. But you really see the parallel here with James, who is really just trying to survive and trying to figure out how to get his family to safety because they're going to be separated, and the things that he has to navigate, and also the conversations he has to have with white people in general, but also with Huck, and the way he has to present himself to the world, and code switching, and all these things that Black people have had to face in not just slavery times, but even today. It like really parallels that well, where we see like the many facets of him and how he plays a role to ensure his safety and how he has to navigate the world. And I thought that that was really good. So it was a 5-star for me. I definitely see why people are loving this book, and I really like a retelling, and I really liked that this retelling gave James his agency back and put a new look on that story in a way that really represents the people that the original story left out. So I really enjoyed it. That is 5 stars for me. I'd recommend it. Then I read The Helm of Midnight by Mariana Lostetter. This is a weird book. Like, I don't really know how to describe it. It's a part mystery, part fantasy, part horror, and it is the start to a series. So we basically follow people who their magic is in masks. So say someone dies and they're very good at medical things, they will have someone create a death mask of them, and it imbues like all their knowledge about their medical practice into these masks, and they can make them look any way. So a lot of times they're like animals and stuff like that. And it's very heavily regulated. And then also you are dealing with the money situation, and like how people get these things in society is with time. So you give time up of your life to get certain things, and then you'll get time from, like, time is essentially currency is what I'm trying to say. So we follow a couple different characters. One is a character who's part of the regulators, which is like a government agency that helps deal with magical objects and like enforce the laws. We see them as they navigate a world where one of these deadly masks has gone missing and they're trying to find it. And then we follow other characters who stories we don't really understand how they align, but as the story comes through more, we do. And one of the characters has a sick mother and she's trying to help find a cure for her through this mask that will help her. And it was one of those books that I really enjoyed, but I also think I feel mixed feelings on. I think I want to give it 3.5 stars. There were some things I think it did really well. I think the magic and the world was so interesting. It was so different. But then there were things happening in the plot that by the end of the story, something like devastating happens, and I felt myself very disconnected from it because I almost feel like there were so many moving parts and so many things I had to learn about the world that I don't think I fully absorbed it as much as I wanted to. So I was left feeling a little disconnected from the story and the characters. I do think the book does a good job of letting you get to know the characters and their motivations, but I also think because the plot was a little convoluted, it just made me always sit there and have to question why things were happening the way they were. So it left me a little disconnected from the overall story. So that's why I think I'm going to go with 3.5 stars. And I don't know if I'll continue on with the series because it is a series. I want to say there's at least 3 books out. It's a trilogy. And I may continue on. I won't say I won't, but I'll probably pick it up from the library. Really quickly, my one audiobook that I don't have. I read the 4th mystery in the Lady Hardcastle series, and that is A Picture of Murder. And I'm just going to forgo really reviewing these kind of books because when I get just so far in like a historical mystery series, I just don't have anything to say about them. This one I gave 3 stars, maybe 3.5. I can't remember. I'll put my rating up. And yeah, the books are generally between a 3 and a 4 star. I'm enjoying reading through it. They're a fun time. I read it directly after The Will of the Many, and it was a good like palate cleanser book, but I really have no thoughts on it, so I'm just gonna give you that. Sorry if that's disappointing, but I feel like when I get so far in a series like that, especially a episodic type series, I just don't have anything to say about it. So that is A Picture of Murder. And then finally, I have This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi. This is a YA fantasy romance that is following a young woman who is a descendant of, well, you know from the beginning. She's a lost heir to the ancient Jinn kingdom, and then we follow a prince who is the heir to the kingdom that is currently ruling. He sees her one day, and he's immediately taken in by her, and he believes that she is actually a spy and not who she says she is, so he decides he's going to figure out what's going on, and we follow her as she's just trying to get by and live her life, and his interest in her sparks a whole string of events that leads to her having to fight for her life. And yeah, it was a fun YA fantasy. The world building is really good. It really sucks you in. It's like a desert fantasy, and the atmosphere of it it was so palpable from the first pages. I feel like Tahereh Mafi really knew the world she wanted to build, and I think it was just evident from when I started the book. I just felt like immediately absorbed, and it is very angsty. It's drama filled, but I really liked it. It's kind of insta lusty, I would say, especially for our guy character Kamran. I feel like his point of view is a little more insta lust, but I just liked how each characters, we get to know them more and see the different things that they're dealing with. And then also at the end of the book, we get a character introduced that I really am interested to find out more about. And I'm currently reading the second one, spoiler, and I'm enjoying it as well. So it's giving me just all the angst and drama that I want, and it's just a fun, fast kind of YA story that I'm really drawn to. I really like it, and I will be continuing on. I gave this 4 stars. All right, there you go. There are all the books I read in the month of February. Thank you for watching. If you want to leave a emoji that's like Roman inspired down below, or a magic wand or something, anything fantasy related down below, I would love to see it if you made it this far and you have nothing else to say. But I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time.